The alien girl's bite could kill any alien, but not a human. HFY sci-fi story. The air in the small, dimly lit room hummed with a soft, mechanical rhythm. The metallic scent of sterilized surfaces filled the space, mingling with the faint crackling of an old radio station in the corner. Lieutenant Chris Darnell sat across from the alien girl, his mind racing. His mission had gone awry, and now, he was at the mercy of someone, or something, that shouldn't even exist. The girl was strange, even by alien standards. She looked human, but that was the only thing that seemed normal about her. Her skin had an iridescent shimmer, like oil spilled over water, reflecting the light in shifting hues. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, cascading down her back in thick strands that seemed to move on their own. But it wasn't her appearance that kept Chris on edge, it was the legend that surrounded her species. The Razorbacks. They were called a race of genetically enhanced creatures capable of extraordinary feats. They could leap from one end of a battlefield to another, lift impossible weights, and regenerate from almost any wound. Their fangs were deadly, capable of piercing through the toughest of materials, and their bites could kill any alien within seconds. Every race feared them. But the girl sitting across from him was different. She had a reputation that both terrified and intrigued Chris. The bite of a razorback could kill any alien in its path. No one had ever survived one of their attacks. But there was one problem. It didn't affect humans. Chris had learned that the hard way when his squad had been ambushed on the far side of the galaxy. They'd been caught by surprise by a band of razorbacks, their lethal fangs tearing through their armor like it was paper. In a desperate move, Chris had tried to fight back, but he'd been overpowered, dragged into the clutches of the female razorback who had just finished slaughtering his comrades. Yet, when her fangs sunk into his arm, he didn't die. He didn't even feel the burning pain that should have been there. Instead, he felt nothing. His body didn't respond to the venom. The girl had looked at him with confusion, perhaps even curiosity, before letting him go. No one had ever survived the bite of a razorback, let alone a human. And so, here he was, captured and imprisoned on their ship, facing the girl who had spared him. She studied him, her large, glowing eyes scanning him like he was an enigma. "You're not dead," she said, her voice deep and melodic, though there was a hint of disbelief. "You should be." Chris nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. "I guess I'm not like the others." She tilted her head, her gaze softening slightly. "You're different," she muttered, more to herself than to him. "Humans aren't supposed to survive." "Well, I guess that's why I'm still here." He forced a small, strained grin. "I didn't want to die, but you must know that already." The razorback girl studied him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, she leaned forward, her fangs gleaming in the low light. "I was sent to kill you," she whispered, the weight of her words hanging in the air. "But now I don't understand. You should have died, but you didn't. I've never seen anything like it." Chris straightened up, his mind working quickly. "Maybe that's why you let me go. Maybe you don't know what to do with someone like me." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her features. "I don't." For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was thick, filled with the tension of their shared history, the conflict they represented. Chris had heard the stories. The razorbacks were ruthless, unstoppable killers that had wiped out entire species. They were the apex predators of the galaxy. And yet, this alien girl, had spared him. "You could have killed me when you had the chance," Chris said finally, his voice steady. "But you didn't. Why?" The girl's eyes hardened, but there was a faint flicker of something deeper in her expression. "I was told that humans were weak," she said quietly, "that you were easy prey. But you survived. I've never encountered something so fragile yet so strong." Chris paused, then smiled. "Humanity's strength doesn't come from how tough we are. It comes from how much we fight to survive, no matter what the odds." Her eyes locked onto his, an unreadable emotion passing through them. "Then you are not like the others," she whispered. "You are different." Chris leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Just like you," he replied. In the quiet that followed, something shifted between them. The razorback girl stood, her tall form looming over him, but there was no sense of threat now. Instead, there was a strange sort of understanding. "You will die if you remain here," she said, her voice firm but not without a hint of regret. The others will not tolerate your presence. Chris thought for a moment, then let me go. She studied him for a moment longer before nodding. I will. But know this, the Razorbacks do not forget. You will not be safe forever. He met her gaze, unflinching. I don't need forever. Just long enough to make a difference. The alien girl's lips curved into a faint smile, the first expression of warmth Chris had seen from her. Perhaps your kind does have something to offer after all. As she unlocked the cell door, Chris stood, feeling the weight of her words. He was a human, and his kind might not have been the strongest, the fastest, or the most advanced, but they had something that the Razorbacks, and every other species in the galaxy, lacked: the will to survive. And with that will, he would fight. The alien girl's bite could kill any alien, but not a human. HFY Sci-Fi story continued. Chris stepped cautiously out of the cell, his body tense, every muscle ready for action. The ship around him was eerily silent now, save for the occasional hum of distant machinery. His heart beat in his chest, not from fear, but from the anticipation of what was to come. The Razorback girl had let him go, but that didn't mean he was out of danger. In fact, he knew it was the calm before the storm. Why are you doing this? Chris asked as he glanced at her, noticing the strange softness in her expression. It wasn't the look of a hunter ready to strike. It was the look of someone caught between worlds. He'd seen it before in soldiers, in prisoners who had witnessed too much war. She wasn't just a killer anymore. She was something more. You'll understand, she replied, her voice distant. She turned away from him, walking to the edge of the corridor where shadows deepened. The glow from the ship's faint lights didn't reach that far, but her silhouette was still visible, a strange mix of grace and strength. Will I? He pressed, taking a few steps closer. She paused but didn't turn to face him. The Razorbacks were bred for war, for survival. We were designed to conquer, to be the perfect predators. But we were never taught to question, to think. Chris took a deep breath. This wasn't the conversation he had expected. And now you're thinking? Her eyes flicked to him. For a moment, there was a flicker of something, a vulnerability. Maybe. Yes, I am. Before he could respond, the ship's intercom crackled to life with a voice that sent a shiver down Chris's spine. Razorback Alpha reporting to all units. The human is on the loose. He must be eliminated. Immediately. Do not fail. The girl's expression hardened as she whirled around, her eyes narrowing with a ferocity that sent a chill through Chris's spine. You don't understand. The Razorbacks have no mercy. They will hunt you down, and they will kill you. Chris didn't flinch. I'm not dead yet, and I'm not planning to be. Her lips pressed into a thin line, a barely noticeable tremor passing through her. I can help you, she said quickly, but you need to trust me. Chris looked into her eyes, weighing the sincerity of her words. He had no reason to trust her. She was an alien. She had been bred to kill. Yet, something about the way she spoke, the hesitation in her voice, made him pause. Why would you help me? Chris asked, his voice low. She hesitated, her gaze shifting. Because you're different. You've survived what should have killed you. And now, the Razorbacks won't stop until you're dead. I can't let that happen. Why not? Chris asked bluntly, crossing his arms. Your people are trained to eliminate threats. I'm a threat to them. She stiffened, as if he had struck a nerve. I am not like them, she said sharply, her voice a mixture of anger and regret. I can see it now, what you are, what your people are capable of. Chris took a step forward, lowering his voice. If you really want to help, how do we get off this ship? I'm not sticking around to be their target. She looked at him, conflicted. I can take you to the escape pods, but they'll know. They'll track us. I can't protect you forever. Chris grinned. Then I'll just have to make sure we don't need protection. She gave him a strange, almost amused look. You're more confident than you should be. That's because I've learned that humans, no matter how weak we may seem, always find a way to survive. And once we survive, we fight. No one is going to kill me today. The girl studied him for a moment, then turned and gestured for him to follow. Stay close. We move quickly. As they crept down the corridors of the Razorback ship, Chris couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe there was still a way out. The Razorbacks had never encountered a human like him. And the girl, who, for reasons unknown, was willing to defy her own kind to help him, was his only chance. They reached the hallway that led to the escape pods, and Chris could hear the growing sound of footsteps. The Razorbacks were searching for him. He could feel the tension in the air, like the calm before the storm. He could hear the deep growls of the Razorback soldiers in the distance, their enhanced senses surely picking up his presence. Quickly, the girl urged, her voice a whisper, but her urgency was clear. The nearest pod is just around this corner. Chris followed her, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He was close now, just a little longer, and he would be out of this hellhole. The Razorbacks would never know what hit them. But as they rounded the corner, they came face to face with a group of Razorback soldiers. The towering figures of the Razorbacks stood at the far end of the hallway, blocking their escape route. Chris froze, his eyes narrowing. The soldiers hadn't seen them yet, but it was only a matter of time. "Go," the girl hissed, shoving him toward a side passage. She turned to face the Razorbacks, her fangs gleaming, her body tensing. "They'll kill you," Chris said, fear flashing in his chest. She glanced back at him, her eyes burning with something between rage and sorrow. "No, they will not. Not if I can help it." Before he could protest, she lunged at the Razorbacks, her movements faster than anything he had ever seen. The soldiers roared in anger, but she was already upon them, her strength and speed overwhelming. Chris ran, not looking back. He didn't know if she would make it out alive, but he knew one thing for sure: this alien girl had given him a chance to survive, and he would make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain. As he reached the escape pod, the doors slammed shut behind him. The countdown to launch began. The last thing Chris heard before the pod blasted into the unknown was the echo of the Razorback's roars. He wasn't just fighting for his survival anymore. He was fighting for the chance to prove that humanity could survive, against the odds, against all enemies. And with that, he knew, no one, no matter how powerful, was truly unbeatable. The alien girl's bite could kill any alien, but not a human. HFY Sci-Fi story continued. The escape pod shuddered as it blasted away from the Razorback ship, the stars outside stretching into streaks of light. Chris gripped the control panel, his heart racing. He glanced back at the small window, trying to see the distant silhouette of the Razorback ship, but it was already a blur, lost in the darkness of space. His mind raced as he recalled the girl's sacrifice. Had she survived? Was she still fighting for her life against her own kind? He couldn't shake the feeling that he owed her more than his survival. She had done what no one had ever done for him. She had defied her people for him, for a human, and now, she was probably paying the price for that. But there was no time to dwell on it. The pod systems flickered, and an alarm sounded, drawing Chris's attention back to the task at hand. The escape pod had already cleared the Razorback ship, but there were still several ships in pursuit. Razorback ships were known for their advanced technology and pursuit tactics. He couldn't outrun them forever. Chris punched in a series of evasive maneuvers, pushing the pod's thrusters to their limits. His hands flew over the controls, his mind focused on survival. The Razorbacks had the technology to track his escape pod. He needed to outwit them, and fast. Come on, he muttered under his breath as he worked to jam the pod's transponder signal. "I'm not going back." The pod's cloaking systems activated with a soft hum, making the pod virtually invisible to scanners. It was a long shot, but it was his best chance. Chris glanced at the display, which now showed a number of Razorback ships following a wide path behind him. They were closing in. A voice crackled in his earpiece, a familiar voice. "Darnell, this is Major Harper. You still alive in there?" Chris couldn't help but let out a relieved sigh. "Harper, you're alive. We've been tracking you since your signal went dark," Harper replied. "Where the hell are you?" "We're coming for you." "Farther than you think," Chris said, his voice tight with urgency. "I'm in a Razorback escape pod. Their fleet is on my tail. If you've got a fighter ready, I need you to get me out of here fast. They're not going to give up." There was a brief pause on the other end. "We've got a fighter in position, but it's a long shot to catch up with you. The Razorbacks don't take prisoners." "Darnell, what's the plan?" Chris's heart pounded. "You've got to distract them. Give me a window to jump to hyperspace. I'll take care of the rest." "Roger that," Harper replied, his voice grim. "Hang tight, Darnell. We're coming for you." Chris knew he didn't have much time. The Razorback ships were getting closer. His thoughts briefly flickered to the girl. He couldn't shake the image of her face. The moment when she had looked at him, the hesitation in her eyes. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't just a killer. She had been more. "I won't forget what you did," Chris muttered to himself, as if she could somehow hear him. "I'll make sure your sacrifice counts." Suddenly, the pod jolted as a burst of laser fire blasted through the void, grazing the pod's shields. Chris's teeth clenched as he yanked the controls to the left, narrowly avoiding another shot. The Razorbacks were closing in, too close for comfort. A few moments later, his comms flared back to life. "Darnell, we're here. Prepare for a flyby." Chris's hands tightened on the controls. "I'm ready. Go." A moment later, the sleek form of a Federation fighter craft shot past him, barely grazing the pod's side. The Razorback ships veered toward the fighter, and Chris immediately took the opportunity. He engaged the hyperdrive, the pod's engines roaring to life as the familiar stars stretched and twisted into brilliant streaks of light. He was free, for now. But he wasn't going to stop there. 3 days later, Chris stood on the Federation cruiser, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The stars twinkled in the distance, and the hum of the ship was oddly comforting after everything that had happened. He had survived the Razorback's pursuit, but the question lingered in his mind: what now? He heard the familiar footsteps approaching behind him and turned to see Major Harper walking toward him. Harper's eyes were tired, his face lined with the exhaustion of endless war, but there was a small, knowing smile on his lips. "You made it, Lieutenant," Harper said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I made it," Chris replied, his voice distant, "but I didn't do it alone." Harper's eyes flickered with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "The Razorback girl," Chris said quietly, his gaze returning to the stars. "She helped me. She saved my life." Harper blinked, clearly taken aback. "A Razorback? You're saying one of them actually helped you?" Chris nodded. "She's different. She's not like the rest of them." Harper studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he sighed. "I don't know, Darnell. The Razorbacks are notorious for their brutality. They don't have mercy. Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," Chris said, his voice firm. "She could have killed me. She could have let me die with the rest of the team. But she didn't. She let me go." Harper took a step back, shaking his head. "The universe is a strange place." "Tell me about it," Chris muttered, his gaze lingering on the stars again. "I owe her, and I'm not going to forget it." The silence between them stretched on for a while, before Harper spoke again, this time with a more thoughtful tone. "You know, Darnell, this could change everything. If there's even a chance that Razorbacks aren't all the same, if there's a way to get them on our side, maybe things can change." Chris looked up at Harper, his heart pounding with new hope. "I'm not saying the war's over, but I think there's something worth fighting for, and I think she showed me that." For the first time in a long while, Chris felt like maybe, just maybe, humanity stood a chance. The alien girl's bite could kill any alien, but not a human. HFY Sci-Fi story continued. The days that followed were a blur of briefings, reports, and endless strategizing. But Chris couldn't shake the thoughts of the Razorback girl. His mind returned to the fleeting moment when she had spared him, when she had chosen a different path than the one laid out for her. He couldn't ignore it. If there was any chance, any way to use that moment to turn the tide of the war, it had to be now. It was early morning, and the cruiser's halls were quiet. Most of the crew still wrapped up in their routines. Chris stood in front of the secure briefing room, his hand resting on the door handle. Inside, Major Harper was waiting. "You ready for this?" Harper asked, his voice low but heavy with a mix of skepticism and resolve. Chris nodded, swallowing his doubt. "I have to be." Harper motioned for him to enter. The room was sterile, as usual, with the cold, unfeeling atmosphere of a warship. But today, there was a new sense of urgency. Maps of Razorback-controlled space flickered on the holotable in the center of the room, and beside them, a few Federation intelligence officers stood, ready to discuss the next steps. "Let's make this quick," Harper began, glancing at Chris as he sat down. "I know you're still processing everything, but you're the only one who's been up close and personal with a Razorback who didn't want to kill you. If there's a chance to use that, we need to find it." Chris glanced at the map. The familiar alien territory now seeming less like an enemy's home and more like a battleground for a chance at peace, or something more. I don't know if she wants to be saved, but I know this, she's different. She's not the mindless killing machine everyone thinks they are, Chris said, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. Harper raised an eyebrow. You think we can reason with them? The Razorbacks are born for war, Darnell. They don't do peace talks. I'm not asking for peace talks, Chris countered. But maybe we don't have to fight every battle. Maybe there's another way. Harper let out a long sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. This could be dangerous, Darnell. If the Razorbacks get wind of what you're suggesting, it could cause an uprising. The military will see this as treasonous talk. Chris shot him a hard look. I've survived a Razorback bite. I think I know what's at stake. Harper met his gaze, eyes calculating. So, what are you proposing? Chris leaned forward. We need to make contact with her, try to convince her to join us. We use her as a bridge, a chance to show that not all Razorbacks are mindless killers. If we can get her to talk to the right people in their faction, leaders, commanders, maybe there's a chance we can split their forces, cause a fracture in their ranks. Harper was silent for a moment. His eyes flickered to the holographic map, where the Razorback ships and territories were clearly marked. Then back to Chris. Let me be clear, Harper said, his tone softening slightly. This is high risk. If we go through with this, we could be opening a door we can't close. Are you sure about this? Chris took a deep breath, his mind flashing back to the alien girl. Her eyes, her hesitation, the bite that should have killed him, everything she had done, everything she had risked. The words he had said to her as she had let him go. I won't forget what you did. I have to try, Chris said, voice unwavering, because if I don't, the war will never end, and neither will the bloodshed. A week later, Chris found himself back in the same ship that had carried him away from the Razorback's grasp, only now, it was on a new mission. The crew had prepped the ship for a high-risk infiltration into Razorback space. His goal was simple, track down the girl, find her, and convince her to help. But deep down, Chris knew this was going to be more than just a diplomatic mission. It was a test of trust, not just between him and the Razorback girl, but between humanity and the Razorback species. Approaching Razorback territory, the voice of the flight officer crackled through the comms, preparing to enter their space. Chris nodded and stood, walking to the ship's observation deck. He couldn't afford to doubt himself now. This mission wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about a future. The ship's sensors hummed as they neared the border of Razorback space. The distant stars blinked back at them, and the ship moved slowly, carefully, avoiding detection. We're close, Chris muttered under his breath. We've got one shot at this. Moments later, the small ship dropped out of hyperspace, appearing in the shadow of a moon orbiting a Razorback-controlled planet. The dense, dark clouds of the planet's atmosphere loomed before them, the faint lights of Razorback ships drifting like distant fireflies in the deep. Get the cloaking device online. We don't want to be seen, Chris ordered, his voice steady, though his nerves tightened. The ship's cloaking system activated with a soft hum, rendering them invisible to enemy ships. But Chris knew they wouldn't be undetected forever. Time was ticking. We've got a signal, the comm officer called out, pulling up a series of encrypted transmissions on the screen. It's faint, but it's coming from a nearby outpost. That's our best lead, Chris said, his heart rate accelerating. He had no idea if the girl was even still there, but the signal was his only hope. The crew set the course for the outpost, navigating through Razorback-controlled space with caution. As they neared their destination, the ship's sensors detected movement, several Razorback ships patrolling the area. The tension in the air grew thick. Stay on course. Don't engage unless absolutely necessary, Chris ordered. They approached the outpost undetected, the cloaking device keeping them hidden as they silently hovered above the surface of the planet. Chris's thoughts raced. Was the girl still there? Had she moved on? There was no way to know. We're here, the officer reported, turning to Chris. We can land near the outpost, but it's risky. Take the risk, Chris said. Prepare a landing team. I'm going in alone. The team exchanged worried glances, but no one objected. They knew this mission was all on Chris's shoulders now. As the ship touched down on the rocky terrain, Chris suited up, his mind fully focused. he stepped off the ramp and into the cold, alien world. The air was thin, with a bitter, metallic taste, and the landscape was barren, dotted with the occasional razorback structure that loomed like dark sentinels. He moved with precision, every step measured. As he approached the outpost, he saw no sign of the girl, only the usual patrols. But then, as he rounded a corner, he stopped short. There she was, the razorback girl, standing alone, watching the horizon with that same distant, thoughtful expression she had worn before. She turned as if she had sensed his presence, her glowing eyes locking onto his. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Chris spoke. "I didn't forget," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of emotion. "I've been looking for you." The girl's lips parted slightly, and for the first time since they had met, she offered him something that wasn't a glare, a growl, or a flash of anger. It was a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You came back," she said quietly. Chris took a step forward. "I came back to ask for your help. The war doesn't have to end in blood. You showed me that." Her gaze softened, but her expression was still conflicted. "You ask for a lot, human. To risk my people's wrath for a chance at peace." "I'm asking for a chance," Chris replied, meeting her gaze unflinchingly. "Just one chance to try something different." She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words against the weight of her own fate. Then, slowly, she nodded. The alien girl's bite could kill any alien, but not a human. HFY Sci-Fi story continued. The ground beneath Chris's boots was colder than he had anticipated. The wind howled through the barren landscape of the Razorback outpost, carrying with it the smell of iron and decay. The girl, the Razorback girl, stood before him, her sharp, predatory gaze fixed on him with both wariness and a strange recognition. She had helped him escape the Razorback ship, and now, here they were again. But this time, the stakes were higher. "You've come this far," she said, her voice low but strong. "But do you understand what you're asking? This is not a simple matter. The Razorbacks will not forgive me. They will not forgive you." Chris nodded, taking a step closer. "I don't expect forgiveness. I expect a chance to change things." The girl hesitated, her eyes flickering between him and the distant outpost. She was a creature of war, born to fight and conquer. But something about Chris, the way he had survived when others had failed, the way he refused to back down, had made her pause. "I don't know what you want from me, human," she said quietly, her tone almost regretful. "But you're not the first to ask for mercy from the Razorbacks. You're not the first to think we could change." Chris's voice softened. "I'm not asking for mercy. I'm asking for you to show them that we're more than just enemies. I'm asking you to help us stop this war before it consumes us all." Her sharp, angular face softened slightly, but only just. "You think I can stop them? I think you can show them that not all Razorbacks are bound by the same chains. Not all of you are just machines of war." For a long moment, she said nothing. The wind whipped through the air, carrying the bitter scent of alien vegetation and ozone. Chris knew she was thinking hard. It was the one thing that made her different from the other Razorbacks he had encountered. The rest were mindless killing machines, driven by a single purpose. She, however, had been caught between two worlds, one that had bred her to be a weapon and the other that was offering her a choice. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke. "Fine," she said, "I will help you. But know this, if I help you, there is no going back. I am not a tool to be used, and if the Razorbacks find out, I will be hunted as an enemy. You're not the only one who will pay the price for this." Chris met her gaze. "I'm willing to take that risk, and I'm willing to fight by your side." The girl's eyes narrowed, calculating. She was sizing him up, as though deciding whether he was truly worth the gamble. For a moment, Chris thought she might turn away, leave him behind. But then, she gave a small nod, her decision made. "Follow me," she said, turning on her heel. "We don't have much time. If we're going to do this, we need to move fast." Inside the Razorback outpost, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Chris followed the girl through the dark, dimly lit halls, her every step sure and swift. The air was filled with the hum of the Razorback's advanced technology, and occasionally, Chris could hear distant echoes of their voices. He had never felt so out of place, an outsider in the heart of enemy territory. But for the first time since his escape, he didn't feel alone. He had the girl by his side, and that gave him an odd sense of comfort. They came to a large chamber at the center of the base, the walls lined with massive, towering figures of Razorback commanders, tough, grizzled warriors who had spent their entire lives waging war. The room was filled with a low, vibrating hum, as if the very walls themselves were alive with the energy of the Razorback's technology. "This is it," the girl whispered, stopping just before the large central control panel. "This is where their leaders meet." Chris nodded. "I'm ready." She turned to him with a strange, almost sad expression. "They may not listen to you. They may never listen to me, but we have to try." With a swift motion, she activated the control panel. A series of holographic screens flickered to life, showing various Razorback leaders, warriors, generals, and tacticians, each one a terrifying figure. Their eyes locked onto the screens, scanning Chris as he stood beside the girl. "What is this?" one of the commanders growled. "Another human trying to bargain for his life?" The girl stepped forward, her eyes burning with an intensity that matched the commander's. "No, Commander, this is not just another human. This is someone who has seen beyond the battlefield. This is someone who understands what you refuse to see." The commander's eyes narrowed. "And what would you have us see, traitor?" The girl didn't flinch. "That war is not the only answer, that we don't have to fight until all are dead." There was a long silence, the tension in the room palpable. Chris could feel the weight of their gaze, the suspicion and hatred burning in their eyes. This wasn't just a diplomatic plea, it was a challenge to everything the Razorbacks had ever known. "You are weak," one of the commanders spat. "The Razorbacks are made for battle, not for peace." The girl's eyes flickered with something that Chris couldn't quite read, but he recognized the flicker of a decision being made. She took a step forward, her voice steady and unyielding. "You think we are made for war," she said, her tone carrying the weight of her conviction. "But we were made for survival, and if we continue down this path, there will be no one left to survive." The commanders didn't respond immediately, but the atmosphere had changed. There was uncertainty in their eyes now, doubt creeping into their hardened faces. They had never been challenged like this before, not by one of their own. The girl's words were like a crack in their armor, a spark of something unfamiliar. After a long moment, one of the commanders spoke. "We will listen to what you have to say, but know this, if you fail, if you bring shame upon the Razorbacks, there will be consequences." Chris's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "We're not here to shame anyone. We're here to offer you a choice." The girl turned to him, her eyes meeting his for a brief, quiet moment. There was something in her gaze, something that said she wasn't just fighting for peace, she was fighting for herself. "And what choice is that?" one of the commanders asked, his tone curious but still laced with disdain. Chris took a deep breath. "The choice to end the war. The choice to stop this endless cycle of violence. To build something better. Something that doesn't involve killing every enemy we meet." There was another long pause. Chris could almost feel the weight of their decision in the air, thick and suffocating. Would they listen? Would they see reason? Or would they condemn both him and the girl as traitors? Finally, the girl spoke again, her voice cold and firm. "We offer you peace, Razorbacks. Not surrender, not defeat, but the opportunity to change. Will you take it?" The commanders exchanged looks. The silence stretched on, thick with the tension of 1,000 years of bloodshed. Then, as if in unison, the Razorbacks nodded, reluctantly. "We will consider your offer," one of them said. Chris let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a start. As the holograms of the Razorback commanders flickered out, the girl turned to Chris, her expression unreadable. "Not all of them will agree," she said softly. "Some will fight, some will refuse, but it's a beginning." Chris nodded, his resolve hardening. "It's more than we had before." And as the first faint glimmers of dawn broke through the barren horizon of the Razorback world, Chris knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be hard, full of challenges and enemies who would not back down, but for the first time, humanity had a chance. And they wouldn't stop fighting until they had peace. The alien girl's bite could kill any alien, but not a human. HFY Sci-Fi story continued. The meeting had ended, but the tension remained thick in the air. The Razorback commanders had left without another word. their cold, war-hardened expressions betraying nothing. Chris watched them go, the weight of what had just happened settling on his shoulders. The girl, still by his side, said nothing for a long moment. Chris turned to her, trying to read her expression. There was a faint flicker of something, regret, hope, but it disappeared almost as quickly as it had come. You did it, Chris said quietly, his voice filled with awe and a bit of disbelief. You made them listen. The girl nodded, her eyes distant. They'll listen, for now. But not all of them will accept this. Some will want to fight. Some will see me as a traitor for even suggesting peace. She paused, looking at him as if gauging his response. You understand what that means, don't you? It's not just the Razorbacks who will hunt me now. If I fail, if this doesn't work, it's not just my life at risk. It's yours too. Chris's heart tightened at the thought, but his resolve only grew stronger. Then I guess we both have a lot to lose. The girl turned away, her sharp features casting long shadows in the dim light of the outpost's central command room. And a lot to gain. But that's never been what we're fighting for, has it? She muttered, almost to herself. I'm not fighting for glory, Chris replied, his voice firm. I'm fighting for a future where we're not enemies. The girl didn't turn to face him, but her voice softened slightly. Maybe that's why you're different. A long silence stretched between them. Then, the girl took a deep breath and turned back to him, her eyes no longer cold and distant but filled with something deeper, something that could have been regret, or perhaps fear. If we're going to make this work, we need to act fast. The longer we stay here, the more likely it is the others will find us. And once they do, there's no turning back. Chris nodded, feeling the gravity of the situation settle into his chest. So what's our next move? She met his gaze, her eyes flashing with an intensity he hadn't seen before. We need to reach the heart of the Razorback leadership. I have a contact, someone high up in the command chain who might listen to reason. If we can convince them to support this peace initiative, we might just have a chance. But it won't be easy. Chris's mind raced as he considered her words. A contact inside Razorback Command? That was risky, and they didn't have much time. How do we even get to this person? I thought the Razorbacks were all about loyalty. If your contact's high up in the ranks, won't they be under constant watch? The girl gave a slight, almost imperceptible smile. You're learning fast. Human. She paused, as if measuring her next words. My contact is a Razorback general. Someone who's seen firsthand the destruction war brings. But they're not in a position to make any moves without support. That's where you come in. Me? Chris asked, a little surprised. How can I help? You're not just a human. You're a symbol, she explained, her tone a little more conspiratorial. Your survival, your resistance against the Razorback forces. It's something many will see as hope. They'll listen to you in a way they'll never listen to me. We can use that. Chris frowned. So you want me to speak for humanity? Lead them toward peace? If they listen to you. Yes, she said, her eyes unwavering. You have the chance to be their voice. You can bring them something different, a chance for something beyond war. That's why they'll listen to you. Chris thought about it for a moment. The weight of what she was asking him to do hung heavy in the air. To step into the heart of Razorback territory. To try and sway a general, a creature bred for war, toward peace. He'd never expected to be in this position. But the truth was, this was the best chance they had. All right, Chris said, his voice resolute. Let's do it. Where do we start? The girl nodded, a flicker of something like approval in her eyes. We're not far from Razorback Command Central. There's a shuttle that can get us in under the radar. But once we land, it's all about staying under their radar. The Razorback military won't be kind to outsiders, even those with the girl from their own ranks at their side. Chris had no illusions. He was stepping into the lion's den. But if there was even a slim chance of ending this war, of forging some kind of peace, then he had to take it. Let's move, he said, and the two of them made their way toward the shuttle bay. The shuttle ride was uneventful, the quiet hum of the engines filling the small cabin as they cruised toward the Razorback Command hub. The girl remained silent, her eyes narrowed in concentration. Chris couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. Was she truly hopeful, or was this just another one of her calculated risks? When they finally touched down on Razorback soil, the gravity of the situation hit Chris with full force. The air was thick, metallic, and cold. The landscape stretched out before him, stark and unforgiving. Razorback Command was a towering fortress in the distance, imposing, built to withstand an assault. The walls were lined with heavily armed sentinels, and laser turrets swept the area, ensuring nothing could approach unnoticed. "This is it," the girl said, breaking the silence. "We get in, find my contact, and make the case, fast and clean." "Do you think they'll listen?" Chris asked, unsure of what to expect. The girl gave him a sharp look. "They will listen because they have no choice, but if they don't, we'll have to be ready to fight." Chris tightened his grip on his blaster, the cold weight of it settling into his palm. "We'll be ready." They approached the command center, using the terrain to their advantage, sticking to the shadows as Razorback patrols passed by without noticing them. The girl moved with purpose, her every step calculated, knowing exactly where to go and how to avoid detection. Chris followed, trying to blend in, his senses alert for any sign of danger. Eventually, they reached the interior of the command center, a maze of metal corridors and military-grade security. The girl tapped in a sequence of codes, bypassing the locked doors with ease. As they moved deeper into the facility, Chris couldn't help but feel the oppressive weight of the Razorback war machine closing in around them. "This way," the girl murmured, leading him down a narrow hallway that opened into a large, dimly lit room. Inside, a single figure stood in the shadows, tall, imposing, but with an air of quiet authority that Chris immediately recognized. The girl stepped forward, her voice steady. "General Kor, I've brought the human." The Razorback general turned slowly, his sharp eyes narrowing as he studied Chris. He was everything Chris had imagined, a towering figure with a rough, battle-scarred face. His presence was overwhelming, his every movement like the predatory grace of an apex hunter. "You're the human who survived," General Kor said, his voice low, rumbling with authority. "The one who escaped our forces." Chris held his ground, despite the general's intimidating presence. "I didn't escape. I was let go by your people." The general's eyes flickered with something, curiosity, or perhaps amusement. "Let go? Why would a Razorback let a human live?" Chris looked toward the girl, who gave a subtle nod. Then, with all the conviction he could muster, he spoke. "Because there's a chance that this war doesn't have to end in death, a chance that we can stop this, if we work together." General Kor said nothing for a long time, studying Chris like a specimen under a microscope. Finally, he spoke. "Peace, a foreign concept, but perhaps human. It is worth considering."